right here, crossing over the river and then taking Water Street down to the Janesville Performing Arts Center. We do have some very kind gentlemen that have offered to stop traffic to make sure that we are safe. I would also like to extend my thanks right now to the state of Illinois for having a procedural error when they voted on this amendment, and that made Wisconsin the first state rather than Illinois. Our program tonight focuses on women and the contributions that they have made, but let's not forget, as evidenced in our crowd today, that men also made a significant contribution to women's suffrage. So we'll be ready to march. We'll be leaving in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
It's my voice. My vote is my voice. My vote is my voice. My vote is my voice. My vote. Let's go, people. My vote is my voice. 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 My vote is here.
Good evening. Happy 100th birthday, 19th Amendment. Welcome. On August 26th, 1920, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was finally ratified, enfranchising all American women, giving us the right to vote. On November 2nd of that year, more than 8 million women across the United States voted in elections for the first time. And now, on June 10th, 2019, we've gathered again to honor and celebrate the incredible, pioneering women who paved the way for us, to pledge to them that we will continue to make a difference, not just for today, not just for today's daughters, but their daughters, and so on. I'm Lucy Beckard with Black Hawk Community Credit Union and a board member of the Women's Fund of the Community Foundation of Southern Wisconsin. Thank you for joining us today. In a moment, you will witness a snapshot of just a few of the significant women listed on the screen who helped shape our community and really our lives. As women, clearly and thankfully, there were so many more. There were so many more women who should be mentioned and celebrated, but we'd have to have more than a week-long retreat to do them justice. So for now, please sit back and let the stories you're about to hear move you. Please take a look.
Lucy Stone, born on August 13, 1818 in rural Massachusetts. Lucy Stone was one of 9 children. Her parents were farmers with deep roots in New England, pursuing religious freedom, and her grandfather was a patriot captain in the American Revolution. She was raised in the Congregational Church and embraced her father's anti-slavery zeal. A leading suffragist and abolitionist, Lucy Stone dedicated her life to battling inequality on all fronts. She was the first Massachusetts woman to earn a college degree, and she defied gender norms when she famously wrote marriage vows to reflect her egalitarian beliefs and refused to take her husband Henry Blackwell's last name. As a scholar, Stone studied Greek and Hebrew and argued that the Holy Bible was mistranslated to oppress and objectify women. Stone also served as president of the New Jersey Women's Suffrage Association and helped organize the New England Association, in which she would be active after the family moved to Boston in 1869. At the same time, Stone served on the executive committee of the American Equal Rights Association. Meet Lucy Stone,
Played by Kay Dupree.
My voice is as loud and as powerful as any man's. Women want to be more than just the limbs to society. We want to share in the happiness and sadness
that goes with this human life. My father was furious when I went to school, went on to college. There were even some newspapers that wrote that I was ugly. But I learned that when I spoke up, people heard me. Now, following the Seneca Falls Convention, by about 22 years, I worked with other leaders to keep trying to get the right to vote as well as to abolish slavery. Finally, by 1870, the 13th and 14th Amendments had been made to the Constitution and ratified. The 15th was introduced, and they were hoping to get it ratified, but these amendments were important because they freed the slaves, all of them. It said that all men would be able to vote. Men, not any mention of the women. So at that time, Mrs. Stanton and Mrs. Anthony decided to form their own advocacy for this, and they started the National Women's Suffrage Association. all women, and they wanted to pressure Congress not to pass the 15th Amendment because they thought women should have suffrage before the freed slaves. Well, I didn't really agree with that. I thought that it was important for anybody to get out from that terrible pit that slavery was. So I started the American Women's Suffrage Association. And the other thing about the NWSA, they were really more radical than I was comfortable with. So I organized the American Women's Suffrage Association, and we included both women and men, black and white. And our association was determined to encourage the men to pass voting rights for women at the state level. We thought that if enough states passed that and allowed women to vote at least on state elections, the Congress would have to go along with it. So to accomplish that, I gave my followers some advice. I said, when you wake up in the morning and he says, "Good morning," you say, "I want to vote." When he says, "What's for dinner?" you say, "I want to vote." And so from the time you get up in the morning until you go to bed at night, keep reminding him, "I want to vote." Now, I'm sad to have to admit our strategy was not very successful. My friend Lucretia Mott always felt like we ought to bring the two groups together. She kept hoping and pushing us to unite in some way. So finally, in 1890, the American Suffrage Association and the National Suffrage Association became one, and we were the National American Suffrage Association. At this time, the lives of women were improving. Many more were in college and graduating. Many were working. But we could still not vote in national elections. So the chorus was continuing to ring out, "Votes for women, votes for women." Join me. Votes for women. Votes for women. Votes for women. So now it is up to the future generations. I will not see it myself, but it's up to the future. And that means you. It's up to you to keep up the fight for recognition and representation for all. Thank you.
Susan B. Anthony was born on February 15, 1820 in Adams, Massachusetts. Her father Daniel was a farmer and later a cotton mill owner and was raised as a Quaker. Her mother Lucy came from a family that fought in the American Revolution and served in the Massachusetts state government. From an early age, Anthony was inspired by the Quaker belief that everyone was equal under God. That idea guided her throughout her life. In 1851, Anthony met Elizabeth Cady Stanton. The two women became good friends and worked together for over 50 years fighting for women's rights. They traveled the country, and Anthony gave speeches demanding that women be given the right to vote. At times, she risked being arrested for sharing her ideas in public. In 1872, Anthony was arrested for voting. She was tried and fined $100 for her crime. This made people angry and brought a national attention to the suffrage movement. In 1876, she led a protest at the centennial of our nation's independence. She gave a speech, Declaration of Rights, written by Stanton and another suffragist, Matilda Jocelyn Gage. Meet Susan B. Anthony, played by Lois Smith.
While the nation is buoyant with patriotism and all hearts are attuned to praise, it is with sorrow that we bring the one discordant note on this 100th anniversary of our country's birth. When subjects of kings, emperors, and czars from the old world join us in our national jubilee, shall the women of the Republic refuse to lay their hands in benediction on our nation's head? Surveying America's exposition, surpassing in magnificence those of London, Paris, and Vienna, shall we not rejoice at the success of this youngest rival among the nations of the earth? May not our hearts, in unison with all, swell with pride at her great achievements as a people, our free speech, our free press, our free schools, our free churches, and all of the other achievements in the rapid progress we have made in material wealth, trade, and commerce, and the inventive arts. And we do rejoice in our success thus far of our experiment in self-government. Our faith is firm and unwavering in the broad principles of human rights that we declared in 1776, not only as abstract truths, but as the cornerstones of a republic. Yet, we cannot forget in this glad hour that while men of every race, clime, and condition have been invested with the full rights of citizenship under our hospitable flag, all women still suffer the degradation of disenfranchisement. And now, at the close of 100 years, as the hour hand of the great clock that marks the centuries points to 1876, we declare our faith in the principles of self-government, our full equality with man in natural rights, that woman was made first for her own happiness, with the absolute right to herself, to all the opportunities and all the advantages that life affords to her complete development. And we deny the dogma of centuries that's written in the codes of nations, that woman was made for man. Her best interests in all cases to be sacrificed to his will. We ask our rulers at this hour, no special favors, no special privileges, no special legislation. We ask justice. We ask equality. We ask that all the civil and political rights that belong to citizens of this United States be guaranteed to us and our daughters forever.
Frances Elizabeth Caroline Willard was an American educator, temperance reformer, and women's suffragist. Willard became the national president of Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, in 1879, and remained president until her death in 1898. Her influence continued for many years as the prohibition of women's suffrage amendments to the U.S. Constitution were adopted. In 1879, she sought and successfully obtained presidency of the national WCTU. Once elected, she held the post until her death. Her tireless efforts for the temperance cause included a 50-day speaking tour in 1874, an average of 30,000 miles of travel a year, and an average of 400 lectures a year for a 10-year period, mostly with the assistance of her personal secretary, Anna Adams Gordon. Willard developed the slogan, "Do everything for the WCTU," encouraging members to engage in a broad array of social reforms through lobbying, petitioning, preaching, publishing, and education. During her lifetime, Willard succeeded in raising the age of consent in many states, as well as passing labor reforms, including the 8-hour workday. Her vision also encompassed prison reform, scientific temperance instruction, Christian socialism, and the global expansion of women's rights. Meet Frances Willard, played by Jan Knutson.
My motto is do everything. Sow a deed, you reap a habit. Sow a habit, you reap a character. Reap a character, and you reap a destiny. The supreme duty of the hour is to convince the moderate drinker that he is doing himself harm. God grant that we should be so divinely led that history's verdict upon our work shall be, by God's blessing, they help the world become wider for women and happier for all humanity. We think the very best way for you to become a true woman is that you should begin just where you are and work tirelessly for the cause. Alone, we can do little. Separated, we are units of weakness. But together, we are batteries of power. Agitate, educate, organize. These are the deathless watchwords of success. And now, let us fling ourselves into the thickening battle. Let us live the life of action, which is the only true and happy life to live. The three requisites for success are ability, availability, and responsibility. And now, everyone, together, please, do everything.
Rhoda Lavinia Goodell was born in Utica, New York. The daughter of radical abolitionist parents, her father being a leading abolitionist, writer, editor, and clergyman. In the mid-1860s, Vinnie, as her family called her, worked and wrote for Harper's Magazine in New York, and then joined her parents' and sister's family in Janesville, Wisconsin in 1871, where she undertook the study of law. She became the first woman admitted to practice law in Wisconsin, and after a long court and legislative battle, was the first woman admitted to practice before the Wisconsin Supreme Court in 1879. A few weeks before she died, Lavinia learned that she had won the first and only case she had argued before the state Supreme Court. Lavinia Goodell is more than a name on a dusty list of important women in Wisconsin's history. She was a woman who desired to serve, but perhaps more importantly, more humanly, she was also just a woman who wanted to be able to use her gifts to the fullest degree possible. And if that meant taking on the patriarchy, well, then that's what it meant. Lavinia is one of several women depicted in the mural on the outside of the Rock County Courthouse building. Rhoda Lavinia Goodell was originally buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in Janesville, Wisconsin. Her remains were removed to the Berea Cemetery by her nephew William Goodell Frost to rest with her parents and sister. Meet Rhoda Lavinia Goodell, played by Lucy Beckard.
In the spring of my senior year at age 19, my sister asked me what I would do after graduation. Stressing the need for women to depend on themselves, I think the study of law would be pleasant, but the practice attended with many embarrassments. Indeed, I fear it would be utterly impractical. Our folks would not hear of me going to college. I should not dare mention it. Mama is very much afraid I shall become identified with the women's rights movement. Yeah. Well, you know my story now. I did study law and became the first woman allowed to practice before the Wisconsin Supreme Court in 1879. I'd like to think my life made a difference, and that you are all living a proud and free existence because of the work of myself and all of the women that you're celebrating tonight. Victoria Woodhull Martin led a fascinating life without a doubt. Her father, a snake oil salesman in the 1840s, soon put his young daughter to work as a fortune teller. She married an alcoholic at age 14, a devastating experience that probably fueled her later thoughts on marriage. Victoria and her sister, who had the curious name of Tennessee, became the first woman stockbrokers on Wall Street after a stint as spiritual advisors to Cornelius Vanderbilt. The sisters also were the first women to found a newspaper in the United States, and Victoria was the first woman to campaign for president 50 years before women could vote. Victoria Woodhull Martin, played by Laura Peterson.
There are many reasons why I stand before you to advocate for women's right to vote. Without the right to vote and have a say in the laws that men created, my person, my money, and my children are my husband's property. My first husband spent what little money we had on drink and other things best not mentioned. I was forced to support our family, and there weren't many respectable jobs for women. Without the right to vote, I am subject to tyranny. I am taxed in every conceivable way. For publishing a paper, I must pay. For engaging in the banking and brokerage business, I must pay. I must pay high prices for tea, coffee, and sugar. I must submit these taxes to a man's government of which I am denied a voice. I fight for a women's right to vote to give women a voice in their own destiny. Just as much as men, women are entitled to an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yeah. I ask to pursue that happiness by having a voice in that government to which I am accountable. Thank you.
Olympia Brown was born on January 5, 1835 in Michigan. Brown was the oldest of 4 children and was raised in a household that regarded religion and education as very important. Olympia Brown dedicated her life to opening doors for women. Among only a handful of women to graduate from college, she became the first woman graduate at St. Lawrence University as a fully ordained woman minister in 1863. As a young minister, she dedicated her life to the women's suffrage movement. This included leading the Women's Suffrage Association and becoming the president of the Federal Suffrage Association from 1903 to 1920. It was not until 1913 when Brown was invited to join the National Women's Party by Alice Paul and Lucy Burns. This group looked to pass an amendment at the federal level and vowed to use a more radical approach that included getting arrested, serving jail time, and exerting enough pressure and support to see the 19th Amendment adopted. She was one of the few original suffragists who lived to vote in the 1920 presidential election. Olympia Brown, played by Gwen Hayskamp.
Those of you who read about my life might be surprised that all I could find was a field in rundown and comatose churches in which to preach. But you must remember that this was a time when all the pulpits of the prosperous churches were already occupied by men, and were the goal of all the young men coming into the ministry, with whom I, the only woman preacher in my denomination, had to compete. So all I could do was find a place abandoned by others and make something of it, and this I was only so glad to do. So today, on my last day in the pulpit, I tell you this. The grandest thing was the lifting up of the gates and the opening of the doors to all women, giving liberty to 27 million women, thus opening, thus opening to them a new and larger life, a higher ideal. A higher ideal. This is a faith in which we have lived, for which we have worked, and has bound us together like a church. Dear friend, stand in this faith. Fight for this faith, and do not be afraid to sacrifice for this faith. This faith is something that has brought to us a higher calling, liberty for all women. A faith that has given us comfort in times of sorrow. A faith that has strengthened us for this noble duty. So friends, remember that this is a faith that has made the world a more beautiful place for us all to live in. Amen.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton was born November 12, 1815 in Johnstown, New York. Stanton was the daughter of Margaret Livingston and Daniel Cady, Johnstown's most prominent citizens. She received her formal education at the Johnstown Academy and at Emma Willard's Troy Female Seminary in New York. Her father was a noted lawyer and state assemblyman, and young Elizabeth gained an informal legal education by talking with him and listening in on his conversations with colleagues and guests. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, played by Jolene Ahrens.
We ask women's enfranchisement as the first step toward the recognition of that essential element of government that can only secure the health, strength, and prosperity of the nation. Whatever is done to lift woman to her true position will help to usher in a new day of peace and perfection for the race. Hear that great conservator of women's love, if permitted to assert itself, as it naturally would in freedom against oppression, violence, and war, would hold all these destructive forces in check, for woman knows the cost of life better than man does. And not with her consent would one drop of blood ever be shed, one life sacrificed in vain. If the civilization of the age calls for the extension of suffrage, surely a government of the most virtuous, educated men and women would better represent the whole and protect the interest of all than could representation of either sex alone.
Ida B. Wells led a dramatic life in turbulent times as a pioneering African-American journalist, activist, suffragist, and anti-lynching crusader of the post-Reconstruction period. Born in Holly Springs, Mississippi on July 16, 1862, Ida B. Wells Barnett became an activist and suffragist honored for her pride in being an African-American woman. In 1895, she married attorney Ferdinand Barnett, added Barnett to her name, and became a part owner of her new husband's newspaper, The Conservator. Around her new home in the Second Ward, Wells Barnett embraced the widely expressed interest in politics among women by establishing the Alpha's Suffrage Club in January 1913. Through her work with the Alpha Club, she realized that African American women did not necessarily have the education to participate in politics and the electoral process. Inspired by this fact, she reached out to other clubs for Black women at the local, state, and national level in order to encourage more women of color to become involved in politics. Wells Barnett's largely community-based efforts, especially with the Alpha Suffrage Club, helped the women's suffrage movement reach its success. Her work helped pass the presidential and municipal bill in Illinois in June 1913, giving women over age 21 partial suffrage, the right to vote in presidential and municipal but not state elections. She helped register women voters and constantly encouraged women who remained doubtful of their place in the electoral process. Even after the 19th Amendment was adopted in 1920, Wells Barnett traveled throughout the Chicago and Illinois area, emboldening African American women to vote and participate in politics. Ida B. Wells, played by Wanda Sloan.
It is no wonder in my mind that the party which stood 30 years as the champion of human liberty and human rights, the party of great moral ideas, should suffer overwhelming defeat when it has proven gutless and unfaithful to its professions and abandoned a position it created, when although its followers were being outraged in every sense, it was afraid to stand for the right and appeal to the American people to sustain them in it. It put aside the question of a free ballot and fair count of every citizen and gave its voice and influence for the protection of the coat instead of the man who wore it, for the product of the laborer instead of the laborer, for the seal of citizenship rather than the citizen, and insisted upon the evils of free trade instead of the sacredness of free speech. I am no politician, but I believe if the Republican Party had met the issue squarely on human rights instead of the tariff, it would have occupied a different position today. The voice of the people is the voice of God, and I long with all the intensity of my soul for Garrison, Douglas, Sumner, Whittier, and Phillips, who shall rouse this nation to a demand that from Greenland's icy mountains to the coral reefs of the southern seas, mob rule shall be put down, and an equal and exact justice is accorded to every citizen of whatever race who finds a home within the borders of the land of the free and the home of the brave. Then no longer will our national hymn be sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal, but every member of this great culturally diverse nation will be a living, harmonious illustration of the words, and all can honestly and gladly join in singing, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing, land where our fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, freedom does ring."
Theodora W. Yeomans was born in 1863 in Ossipin, Wisconsin, and died in 1932. Yeomans was an American journalist, editor, and women's suffrage activist from Wisconsin. As president of the Wisconsin Women's Suffrage Association, Yeomans played an important role in securing Wisconsin women the right to vote and wrote the lyrics for the 1914 convention of the Wisconsin Women's Suffrage Association. Theodora Yeomans, played by Tricia Clausen.
When the legislature of the state of Wisconsin grasped the first available opportunity to ratify the amendment to the United States Constitution, abolishing sex as a qualification for voting, it closed a chapter in the state's history of suppressing women's interests, and it ended a campaign that had been active for 50 years. The legislature passed a resolution ratifying the amendment on the morning of June 10, 1919. The Wisconsin Women's Suffrage Association continued to function for some months longer in order to provide support in terms of money and influence to the National American Women's Suffrage Association in order to ratify the amendment in other states. Our campaign was as lively as we, some trained, some untrained in suffrage campaigns, could make it. Mass meetings were held in points of vantage. Suffrage automobiles toured many counties, and the native badger witnessed the devastating shock of seeing a woman standing on a street corner in an automobile pleading for political freedom. Our work involved educating and organizing, raising money and expending it, writing and speaking, and never for one moment failing in our faith as to the justification of our cause or its final outcome. When it became clear that Washington would move faster than the state of Wisconsin, I focused my efforts on building support for that coming constitutional amendment. And in the end, Wisconsin did its part. History may say that ratification just happened, that enfranchisement was in the air. But changing political ideals in society takes unrelenting, ceaseless toil. Stones wear with constant dropping. So do prejudices. They're just tougher. If you would join me now in singing the song that's printed in your program. Here we go. On Wisconsin, forward be the cry. Slow but surely, late but coming, bound for victory. On Wisconsin, we thy daughters true, bound to make a land of freedom, we are out of you. On Wisconsin, cannot stop or stay, till thy children all are equal, hail the mighty day.
Emma Manning was born in Monroe, Wisconsin, August 27, 1870. Emma attended St. Angeles College in Minneapolis, transferred to the University of Wisconsin, and then studied piano in Chicago. She was active in the suffrage movement, worked in international peace organizations, and was a member of the Janesville Federation of Women, the Janesville Girl Scouts, the League of Women Voters, the Janesville History Club, and the Janesville Women's Club Association. Emma's husband, Elmer Manning, operated a machine shop in Janesville, and they had one daughter, Caroline. Most notably was that Emma was the first woman elected to serve on the Janesville City Council. Emma Manning, played by Teresa Wynn.
I became interested in women's rights as a young woman, and I firmly believe in women's suffrage. April 3rd, 1923, I was elected to Janesville's first city council. After the thank you very much. This was after the citizens voted to adopt the city manager form of government the year prior, the first municipality in the state to do so. Wonderful Janesville. I ran on a coalition ticket with 6 gentlemen, all of us committed to doing everything possible to make this form of city government a success. And April 4th, 1923, the Janesville Daily Gazette wrote, "Mrs. Emma Manning is equipped for the place, and her success in the face of entrenched opposition of those who do not believe a woman's place is in public office is a remarkable tribute to her splendid qualities." Well, heavens, I was honored to serve in this position for 4.5 years.
Alice Stokes Paul was an American suffragist, feminist, women's rights activist, and leader of the campaign for the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Along with Lucy Burns and others, Alice Paul organized events such as the Women's Suffrage Procession and the Silent Sentinels, which were part of the successful campaign that resulted in the amendment's passage in 1920. Later, Paul spent a half-century as leader of the National Women's Party, which fought for the Equal Rights Amendment, which was written by Paul and Crystal Eastman, to secure constitutional equality for women. She won a large degree of success with the inclusion of women as a group protected against discrimination by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Alice Paul, played by Stacey Reed Bodner.
I think that American women are further along than any other women in the world. But you can't have peace in a world in which some women or some men or some nationalities are at different stages of development. There is so much work to be done. It has become impossible to forget the votes of women, just as it was impossible to forget the Reformation of Luther. We women of America tell you America is not a democracy. 20 million women are denied the right to vote. There will never be a new world unless we are a part of it. So, in 1917, myself and 1,000 other Silent Sentinels began an 18-month-long picket at the White House. Mr. President, how long must women wait for their liberty? How long until we get our rights that we deserve? We endured verbal and physical attacks from spectators. And it only got worse after America entered into World War I. In fact, instead of protecting our right to free speech, we were all arrested on flimsy charges like obstructing traffic. Could you believe that I was sentenced to 7 months? While in jail, I organized a hunger strike. To retaliate, they force-fed me and threatened to put me in an insane asylum. But newspaper accounts garnered public sympathy. I'd like to think my efforts led to President Wilson announcing his support of suffrage in 1918. It would take them 2 more years to approve the 19th Amendment. After the 19th Amendment was passed, I joined the Women's Party, a party of women of all nations and creeds and races, united to increase the status of women in the society. I never doubted that equal rights was the right direction.
Most reforms, most problems are complicated, but to me, there is nothing complicated about ordinary equality.
We were fortunate to have women who were not only active in the women's suffrage movement, but were also important women leaders who nurtured and cultivated the cultural and social health of our communities. These women include Julia Isabel Lovejoy, Gertrude Mowat McPherson, and Mildred Dolly Nowlin.
I was born in 1849 in New Haven, Connecticut. I first visited Janesville in 1879 when I was 30 and met a handsome and prominent builder and lumberman by the name of Allen Perry Lovejoy. We fell in love and were married the next year. My husband built me a 10,000 square foot home on a lovely lot on St. Lawrence Avenue overlooking the city of Janesville. It was known as the Lovejoy Mansion, and I am proud to say it still stands today. I was known as a very fascinating person in my own right. In fact, I've been told that they called me the First Lady of Janesville because of my many civic endeavors. I was the first president elected for the Rock County Women's Suffrage League in 1912. I helped organize and set up in place a kindergarten, the first kindergarten in Janesville, as well as the local chapter for the Daughters of the American Revolution. I sponsored the first hospital in Janesville in a house on Mineral Point Road. I also served on the public library, Janesville's public library, for several years. And I was able to live in the Lovejoy Mansion until my death in 1953 at the age of 103.
I remember well my mother's role as an early suffragist. When my father was stationed at a nearby post during World War I, she took me with her to Washington, D.C. to lobby for votes for women. I was so proud of her. She was truly a public-spirited woman, a real do-gooder. She wasn't one to really march with banners, though. Instead, she visited each and every senator and congressman, urging them to please support votes for women. I'm so glad she took a stand, and I'm so glad she took me with her, because it has made all the difference in my own life, for I too have grown into an independent woman.
I moved to Janesville from Baltimore in 1928, and I have loved every minute of it since. I'm interested in this town. I want to do everything I can to keep it the great city that it is. Volunteer work keeps me active mentally and physically, and I was involved in various organizations, such as the Janesville Art League, the YWCA, Mercy Hospital Castaways Thrift Shop, the local Red Cross, the United Givers, Rotary Gardens, the Janesville Concert Association, and the Beloit Janesville Symphony Orchestra. But my most treasured involvement was the Janesville Women's Club, where I was instrumental in developing programs and serving on the board. I am a staunch supporter of the Janesville Women's Club. I feel that the town as a whole does not appreciate this building, what it is, what it does, what an asset it is to this city. This is one of the few cities this size to boast such a facility. It's an integral part of Janesville and something we really have to be proud of. If city officials are talking about tourism and showing what Janesville has, I think the Women's Club ought to be part of that. I do my best to bring women locally and from out of town to the club to become members, because frankly, I think they should belong, because it's an asset to the city, and they should support it like they would anything else of value.
Catherine Morrison was an American educator and Democratic Party politician who was the first woman to be elected to serve in the Wisconsin Senate. Morrison was elected November 1974, seated January 1975, and served one term representing the 17th District. Morrison was active in various progressive women's movements throughout the state, working closely with Mandy Stellman on numerous issues that plagued the state, including supporting the change to language in Wisconsin state statutes and legislation to make them gender neutral. After she was elected, the Sexual Assault Act of 1976 was passed, but she was active in the women's liberation movement before she was elected and helped lay the foundation for the eventual support of the Sexual Assault Act. Her most notable achievements include helping to pass laws such as the Farmland Preservation Act, plus an act that lowered the inheritance tax on both widows, specifically farm wives, and widowers, and also ensured that no-fault divorce in the state of Wisconsin would pass. There was still much resistance towards equal rights for women, as she had to fight hard to keep 13 amendments from passing that attempted to dilute broader gender equality bill that did end up passing in 1975. She ensured the passage of a bill that placed limits on court expenses, fees for attorneys, and court awards for medical malpractice lawsuits, despite her major lobbying against her actions from doctors, insurance companies, lawyers, and various consumers. The Wisconsin Sexual Assault Act of 1976, a piece of legislation she helped create while she was still a professor, passed during her time in the state Senate. The act passed with 30 votes to 1, and it was considered as the best piece of rape punishment legislation in the country, and inspired other states to reform their own laws as well. After leaving the Wisconsin State Senate, Morrison pursued a career in healthcare administration with the United States government, the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation, and the March of Dimes. She published about the topic of healthcare economics. Morrison had a BA and MBA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Since her inauguration, there have been 18 women senators as of 2003, 13 of whom had previously served in the Assembly. Kate Morrison, played by Jolene Ahrens.
They called me a trailblazer in 1974 at the young age of 32. I didn't see it that way until I got elected. Then everyone made such a fuss about it. I remember my first week in office trying to adjust from being an associate professor. The two jobs could not be more different. I take a liberal position on most issues, but I do have my core issues that weren't partisans: limits on medical malpractice, farmland preservation, and reducing inheritance taxes, especially for widows and farm wives. My colleague Tim Cullen said the nicest thing about me when he said, "She's so likable, yet so serious on the issues, and she's serious about getting things done." Oh, I hope at the end of my life I can be remembered like that. I'm proud of my accomplishments. But more than anything, I hope to be loved as a caring, attentive, supportive daughter, sister, aunt, friend, who focused on using my gifts to develop policies and practices that made other people's lives better.
Ruth Jeffress, born the daughter of Thomas Mowat Jeffress and Harriet Abigail Hall, January 18, 1894, Ruth was a graduate of Girton Academy and Vassar College in New York. She served as president of the Janesville Board of Education in 1938 and 1939. Ruth was a member of the Women's History Club, the State Historical Society, the Rock County School Committee, and the Greater Janesville Corp., and was the first president of the Janesville League of Women Voters. Ms. Jeffress never married and died June 22, 1973, at age 79. Ruth Jeffress is played by Becky Weber Johnson.
I've long been interested in women's rights. After all, women's rights are human rights. And I've always been willing to speak in public about the topic. At the age of 23, I gave a talk to Red Cross workers about civic relief work at the Janesville City Hall after I'd taken some courses on the topic in Chicago. At 28, I was appointed to the National Board of the YWCA, having been a leader in the YWCA movement and girls' work in Janesville. In 1935, I was delighted to welcome President Roosevelt's Labor Secretary Frances Perkins to Janesville for a speaking engagement at the Congregational Church, which was sponsored by the Women's History Club. Appointed in 1945 by Governor Goodland to a committee to study county government, and in 1947 to a committee on education by Governor Redenbaum, I was honored to serve our great state.
Valvalia Hortense Rogers, Val Phillips, was born in 1923 and died in 2018. Val was an American attorney, politician, jurist, and civil rights activist who served as an alderperson and judge in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and as Secretary of State of Wisconsin 1978 to 1982, often as the first woman and/or African American in her position. She was the first African American woman to graduate from the University of Wisconsin Law School, the first African American, as well as the first woman elected alderwoman to the Milwaukee Common Council, and the first African American, as well as the first woman to serve as a jurist in Wisconsin. Val Phillips, played by Irene Oliver.
I have lived a lifetime of firsts, and all at a time when African Americans were not allowed to practice their civil rights. But getting my first choice on a place I want to live as a black woman was not my first. Imagine it. You have a good job, you graduated from college, but when you meet the landlord, you're looking for your first apartment on your own. It's very exciting. But when you meet the landlord, they turn you away because of the color of your skin. Oh yeah. So what do? Would you let these racists tell you where and how to live, or would you fight? Good. Well, I fought too, for 6 long years to pass the fair housing law. I told my fellow council member in 1967, after once again they rejected, that I can only say one thing, that either I don't read, yet I graduated from college, go figure, or you're not sufficiently knowledgeable to speak to the subject, and that could well be, or you're just afraid to speak, or you lack the courage to speak. Do I look like I lack the courage to speak? Watching this legislation fail time after time, we needed to move into action. 200 nights of marching, being arrested at a rally, riots. Finally, in 1968, the fair housing law that I had fought and written 6 years earlier passed the city council.
I've just come from the Janesville City Council, where they passed a resolution commemorating the 100-year anniversary of Wisconsin's ratification of the 19th Amendment. A resolution introduced by our own council member Sue Conley and endorsed, seconded by council member Doug Markline, who told me he was honored to have been asked. It reads, whereas on June 10th, 1919, the state of Wisconsin led the nation as the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment, allowing women the right to vote. And whereas the fight for women's suffrage from the first Women's Rights Convention to enfranchisement lasted 72 years, with women from all walks of life, political views, and demographic backgrounds asking for the right to voice their opinions at the polls. And whereas Wisconsin women by the thousands advocated for the right to vote on the streets, in newspapers, and in the state and federal capitals. And whereas it took male allies to support women in their endeavor to vote, for it was sons, daughters, and fathers who ultimately heard the call of women and took the historic vote on June 10th, 1919. And whereas women are running for office in unprecedented numbers, Many current politicians, both male and female, remember that they follow in the footsteps of these great suffragists. And whereas the Women Fund, in partnership with the Janesville League of Women Voters, celebrates the historic victory and the hard work and dedication required in a special event titled 100 Years, Votes for Women, March for Progress, and a Living Story, taking place this evening. Now, therefore, it be resolved by the City of Janesville Council that June 10th, 2019, commemorate the 100-year anniversary for the ratification of Wisconsin's the 19th Amendment, reaffirming the city's commitment to empowering and uplifting the voices of women in our community. It was adopted unanimously. Yay! So we're still making news.
Justice Shirley Abrahamson was born in 1933 and is an Associate Justice and former Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. She was appointed to the court in 1976 by Governor Patrick Lucey, becoming the first female justice to serve on Wisconsin's highest court. Abrahamson was re-elected to the Supreme Court in 1979, 89, 99, and 2009. She became Chief Justice on August 1st, 1996, and served in that capacity until April 29th, 2015. Abrahamson was born and raised in New York City, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts magna cum laude from New York University in 1953, a Juris Doctor with high distinction from Indiana University Law School in 1956, and a Doctor of Juridical Science in American Legal History from University of Wisconsin Law School in 1962. Abrahamson and her husband Seymour were married for 54 years, and they have one son. In August 2018, Abrahamson announced she was diagnosed with an undisclosed type of cancer and will finish the remainder of her term, which ends in 2019, having served her position for 44 years. Justice Shirley Abrahamson, played by Teresa Wynn.
Forty-three years ago, I began this incredible journey when Governor Patrick Lucey appointed me to the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. I was not only the first woman to serve on the State Supreme Court, but at that time, I was the only female judge in the state of Wisconsin. What a wonderful journey it has been. I am the child of immigrants, and that has influenced me a great deal, that this country was open. My mother and father taught me that I can do whatever I set my mind to, that no doors are to be closed. When I graduated law school in 1956, only 3% of law school students were women. Today, 51.3% are female. The experiences my gender has taught me have, of course, made me sensitive to certain issues, both legal and non-legal, as have other areas of my background. My point is that none of us is just a man or just a woman. Each of us is a unique individual with diverse experiences. As I look back on my long career, I realize there are things I could have changed and done differently. I think that is human nature. However, I don't believe I would have made any major changes. I feel that I have stayed true to myself. I have followed my dreams, worked hard, and hopefully been an inspiration to some. Tonight, I ask this of you, to follow your dreams no matter where they take you. Understand that it's going to take hard work and determination, and that there may be others who do not always agree with you. Be strong, be brave, and stay true to yourself. Thank you.
Tammy Suzanne Green Baldwin, born in 1962, is an American politician serving as the junior United States Senator from Wisconsin since 2013. A member of the Democratic Party, she served 3 terms in the Wisconsin State Assembly, representing the 78th District, and from 1999 to 2013, represented Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives. As a gay woman, Baldwin has made history several times through her electoral successes. In 1998, she became the first openly gay woman and first openly LGBT non-incumbent elected to the United States Congress, as well as the first woman elected to represent Wisconsin in Congress. In 2012, Baldwin became the first openly gay person and first openly LGBT person elected to the United States Senate. Baldwin defeated her Republican opponent, former Wisconsin Governor Tommy Thompson, in the 2012 United States Senate election in Wisconsin. She was reelected in 2018 by a landslide, defeating Republican nominee Leah Vukmir. Her reelection made her the first openly LGBT person to win a 2nd term in the Senate. Tammy Baldwin, played by Nancy Sontag.
Good evening. What a wonderful way this has been to recognize and celebrate all of the outstanding women that have come before us. Did you know that in 1869, the women's suffrage movement in the state of Wisconsin began right here in Janesville? That's certainly something you should be proud of. We've come a long way, but we have so much farther to go. In 1984, I had just graduated from college. I was sitting in my apartment in Madison, and I was watching the Democratic National Convention on television. When I was doing this, I saw Geraldine Ferraro walk across the stage to accept the nomination as the first female vice president nominee on the major party ticket. When I watched her do that, I thought, you know, I could probably do anything that I want and be anything that I want to be. So in 1998, I decided that it was time to run for the House of Representatives. Many people told me no. They told me it wasn't time. They told me voters weren't ready to accept a female, much less a woman who was gay. But I ran anyway, and I was elected. I was the first female from the state of Wisconsin in 1998. Women have accomplished a great deal in the last 100 years. There are currently 25 females serving in the United States Senate. 102 members in the House of Representatives are women. 4 women have served on the United States Supreme Court, and there are currently 9 female governors. 50.8% of the population of the United States is female, but we are still underrepresented in government. It's not as a token female, person of color, or member of the LGBTQ community that we can succeed. For without numbers, which is our strength, we are often treated as a token and we lack the support network to succeed. We have so much to offer and so much farther to go. On average, women earn 20% less than men. It's imperative that we have affordable health care available to everyone and that women have control over their own reproductive rights. Higher education should be available and accessible to everyone. It was 35 years ago that the first woman was on a major party ticket for president or vice president of the United States, and we still have not had a woman hold either position. Remember, each of us is only one vote and one voice, but together we can make a difference. Thank you.
Gwendolyn Sophia Moore was born in 1951 and is an American politician and the U.S. Representative for Women's 4th Congressional District, serving since 2005. In 2016, Moore was elected to serve as caucus whip of the Congressional Black Caucus for the 115th United States Congress. She is the first woman to represent the district. She is also the second woman after Tammy Baldwin and the first African American elected to Congress from Wisconsin. A champion for women, Congresswoman Moore served as the Democratic co-chair of the Congressional Women's Caucus from 2011 to 2013. In this capacity and through her subsequent work, she has become a leader in issues like health insurance reform, women's health, maternal and infant mortality, and domestic violence, leading the charge to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act over the past 2 Congresses. She has also been an outspoken opponent of efforts to limit women's reproductive freedom and care.
Good evening, people of Wisconsin. The centennial of Wisconsin's ratification of the 19th Amendment is a significant milestone in our history. From my vantage point, I can see the progress women have made. In 2004, I became the first African American, male or female, to be elected to the United States Congress from the state of Wisconsin. But as still the only African American and only the second of 2 women ever elected to the Congress from Wisconsin, we still have a long way to go. I was born in Racine and raised in Milwaukee, the 8th of 9 children. My father was a union factory worker and my mother a public school teacher. I struggled to attend Marquette University as a single expectant mother on welfare. If it hadn't been for the federally funded TRIO program, I don't know that I would have been able to earn my BA in political science. After graduating from Marquette, I became a community leader and VISTA volunteer, spearheading the startup of a community credit union that earned me the honor of being named the National VISTA Volunteer of the Decade. Thank you. I have continued to be a strong advocate for measures that improve the economic and employment conditions in low-income housing, low-income communities during my years in the Wisconsin State Assembly and Senate, and during my time in the U.S. Congress. I have been a champion for women on issues like health insurance reform, women's health, maternal and infant mortality, and domestic violence, and I have made it my mission to be a voice to the voiceless, both domestically and abroad. Through my work in Congress, I have collaborated with international partners working for the development of responsible democracies. Mindful of the future of the generations of our children, our grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, I have been and will continue to be a tireless advocate for women's rights and civil rights, and I will continue the fight against racial profiling, domestic abuse, and voting rights violations. Winning the right to vote was a hard-fought battle. We cannot afford to let our precious democracy slip away from us through apathy and neglect. Thank you.
Judge Barbara McCrory is a judge for the Rock County Circuit Court Branch 7 in Wisconsin. She was elected on April 3, 2012, becoming the first woman to serve as a circuit court judge in Rock County. She was re-elected in 2018. McCrory received her bachelor's degree in agricultural journalism from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1983. In 1992, she earned her JD from University of Wisconsin-Madison. McCrory served as Rock County's Family Court Commissioner from 1999 until her election to the Circuit Court in 2012. Before that, she worked in private practice at the Brennan Style Law Firm in Janesville, Wisconsin. Please welcome, in person, Judge Barbara McCrory.
I want to take you back to the evening of April 3rd, 2012. I was talking with Anna Marie Ames of the Janesville Gazette, and I just won my election. And I'm just chatting away, trying to figure out, okay, what am I supposed to say? I want to make sure I say the right thing. I don't want anything embarrassing in the newspaper about me. And I walked out of the courthouse, and it was dark except for this bright light shining on the Janesville Women's History mural. And at that point, and I'm getting them again. I got goosebumps. And I said to Anna Marie, I said, I've got goosebumps. And she goes, I'm feeling them through this line. I've got them too. And I was so humbled of what had happened for me and the work that had occurred all those years before. And I'm humbled to be here tonight as well. I'm a farm girl from Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. I grew up on a dairy farm. And we all know on a dairy farm, the cows do the real work. My 10th grade government teacher and my brother and sisters all warned me about this. The first day of class, he says, oh, we've got a ward in the household. All right, so tell me about that lead cow. What does that lead cow do? And I knew the answer was, well, the lead cow is the one that says, oh, it's time for milking, and gets up and all the other cows follow her to the barn. I don't think of myself as a trailblazer. I think of myself as one of those cows that just follows everyone else into the barn. But what I think about is that I'm doing the work that I'm suited for. And in reality, I'm very fortunate to reap the benefits of those who came before me. And we're all fortunate in that regards. But what does that mean for us? First of all, it's important to remember how far women have come. I have with me a book that I keep in my office. It's a law book, so it's very appropriate for me. It is the 39 Wisconsin Reporter. And in that, you will find the Supreme Court's decision on the motion filed by Miss Lavinia Goodell to be admitted to the bar. And I have to read some of this for you because I go through this every once in a while and I read it just to remember how far we have come. The Chief Justice of the court at the time wrote, "The law of nature destines and qualifies the female sex for bearing and nurturing of the children of our race and for the custody of the homes of the world and their maintenance in love and honor. And all lifelong callings of women inconsistent with these radical and sacred duties of their sex, as is the profession of the law, are departures from the order of nature, and when voluntary, treason against it. The cruel chances of life sometimes baffle both sexes and may leave women free from the peculiar duties of the sex. These may need employment and should be welcome to any not derogatory to their sex and its proprieties or inconsistent with the good order of society. But it is public policy to provide for the sex, not for its superfluous members, and not to tempt women from the proper duties of their sex by opening to them duties that are unfit. There are many employment in life not unfit for the female character. The profession of law is surely not one of these. The peculiar qualities of womanhood, its gentle graces, its quick sensibility, its tender susceptibility, its purity, its delicacy, its emotional impulses, its subordination of hard reason to sympathetic feelings are surely not qualifications for forensic strife. Nature has tempered women as little for the juridical conflicts of the courtroom as for the physical conflicts of the battlefield. Womanhood is molded for gentler and better things. It would be revolting to all female sense of the innocence and sanctity of their sense, shocking to man's reverence for womanhood and faith in women, on which hinge all the better afflictions and humanities of life, that women should be permitted to mix professionally in all the nastiness of the world which finds its way into the courts of justice. Discussions are habitually necessary in courts of justice, which are unfit for female ears. The habitual presence of women at these would tend to relax the public sense of decency and propriety. If, as counsel threaten these things are to come, we will take no voluntary part in bringing them about." It's easy to laugh or to make light of some of these things, but these ideas carried the day back in 1875. But That didn't stop Ms. Godell at all. And she worked hard to change the laws so that she could then be an active member of the bar. So that brings me to the second thing that we should think about, and that's don't give up. You need to step out of your comfort zone every once in a while. Just pause for a moment and think what this world would be like if the women that we're honoring here tonight had given up. I had to run for office a couple of times before I was elected, so I knew that I couldn't give up. The second time I ran, I took my daughter out for breakfast and we were having a nice chat, and I wanted to talk to her about this whole idea of me running for judge and the difficulties that it would be, and I was going on and on about it, and my daughter, in her very practical sense, put her fork down and she says, "Mom, it's time to put on your big boy pants and get out of your comfort zone." So that's what I did, running for the second time around. And I'm happy to say that in a crowded field of 6 people in the primary, I was the top vote getter. And obviously in the general election, I was as well. But it didn't come without difficulties. Because whenever you put yourself out there and run for office, there are going to be those naysayers. There are going to be those people that are going to say, she can't do the job. She's too nice. She wouldn't be able to do this. And I remember one of the newspapers doing their editorial and saying how good I was at my current job, and really I should just stay in that current job. That was hard to hear, very, very difficult to hear, but it didn't stop me. And it shouldn't stop anyone. You have to take those ups and downs and just move forward. And that brings me to the third point that we need to do, and I think this is general in terms of what we've heard here tonight, and that's supporting other women and staying involved. Whenever I have a jury come in, one of the things I say to them is that jury duty is a public service. It may be the last form of selective service, which is a required public duty in this country. Someone said that jury service honorably performed is as important in the defense of this country, our Constitution and the laws, and the ideals and standards for which they stand, as the service that is rendered by the soldier on the field of battle in the time of war. Our electoral process is not selective service, but it is just as important. If we do not exercise it, if we do not get involved, it could go away. And to paraphrase a well-known quote, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good women to do nothing. And I think if you look at the people that we're honoring here tonight, the option was not for them to do nothing. And it should not be an option for you either. Thank you.
Before we close tonight, I just have a couple of announcements that I would like to make. In case you've forgotten, my name is Nancy Sontag. I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters in Janesville. We have 3 actresses that we want to acknowledge that didn't get acknowledged in the bios earlier. One was Julia Lovejoy, was played by Gwen Hayskamp. Mrs. Gertrude Mowat McPherson was played by Susan Johnson. And Mildred Dolly Nowlin was played by Holly Baumel. The next thing we are very honored to receive. This was given to us this evening by a member of Senator Baldwin's office. It is one of 5 written copies of this record, and we are very honored to receive it. It's quite lengthy. I'm only going to read the first little bit of it for you. Ms. Baldwin, Mr. President, I am proud to rise today to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the day my home state of Wisconsin became the first state in the nation to ratify the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, giving women the right to vote. Although the outcome was a historic victory, women did not gain the right to vote without a struggle. The road to Wisconsin's ratification of the 19th Amendment was paved with more than 70 years of advocacy and speeches, marches, and rallies, legislation and lawsuits by strong Wisconsin suffragists. Many of the battles were lost before they were won.
On behalf of the Women's Fund of the Community Foundation of Southern Wisconsin and the League of Women Voters, thank you all for being with us tonight. I'd like to give a special thank you. Way in the back is a gentleman who volunteered his time with very little notice to make all of the production side work. His name is Alan Luckett. If you could stand up, please. My sincere apologies for the last notices. Thank you for pulling this together. And again, he volunteered. He's with JATV, and we thank you for everything that you've done. So thank you, Alan. Also, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Black Hawk Community Credit Union, and all of the other businesses and individuals who made this happen. I also want to thank someone special, and if she's in here, you have to stand. Her name is Lori Stotler. So Lori, see, they love you and they don't even know what you did yet. She's the one who put all of the scripting together, all of it. So thank you so much, Lori. Thank you. So please join me in thanking the amazing women on stage who brought these stories to life. Ladies, we bow. That's it. Some final words. We would also like to recognize Kay Dupree. Would you please come out? I just told you to exit. Thank you. We'd like to recognize Kay Dupree, who last Saturday received the Meg McLean Award presented by the Wisconsin League of Women Voters. This award is presented annually to one individual for exemplary work as a citizen advocate. So please, thank you. Thank you so much. After you leave, please stick around for friendship and food, as the food trucks will still be serving. But before you go, I'm confident you will be leaving here having learned a few things and hopefully are inspired to be the pioneers of today. The few stories you heard look back on the history of several incredible women and their great achievements, because their journey to suffrage continues to hold the key to our future as well. Please remember their stories and consider how your story will play out in history. We are a powerful bunch, and both together and alone, we can continue to change the world. Speaking of change, we invite you to reach into your pockets and make a gift to the ushers on your way out if you choose. All donations will be shared between the Women's Fund and the League of Women Voters to help them continue their advocacy and support of women. And finally, 100 years ago today, women won the right to vote as the result of decades-long struggle. Yeah. But clearly, there is still work to be done, and it doesn't have to be daunting. In fact, it can be fairly easy. For example, raise your voice. In other words, speak out when you see injustices. Next, empower one another. Women lift up other women. Amen. United in a tight sisterhood. Get involved. Become an active advocate. Educate the next generation. And lastly, continue this important conversation and support the cause. Why? Because as women, as friends, and as colleagues, that's what we do. Thank you and good night.